Hi gang, Rob here, coming to you in the evening of 25 February 2013. Tonight I have a video that's kind of a favor to an old buddy, Campfiretalk. Apparently he looked at my video today of the modifications I did on the cold steel American Lawman, and being sort of a blade tinkerer himself, he mentioned in the process that perhaps he had some work he could do on his Buck Vantage. And it reminded me that yes, I own a Buck Vantage. This is the original design, large size Pro version, which means it has the machined and polished G10 scales and the S30V blade. And a few years ago, I guess I've had this knife a little over 3 years, and shortly after I got it, I found it wanting in a couple areas and made some modifications myself. And before I get into what I did and Campfire, if you can hang on with me for a few minutes, I'll get to exactly what I did. So if you'd like to replicate these modifications and improvements, you're welcome to, and that's kind of why I'm making the video. But let me kind of explain my relationship with this knife. Those of you who have watched some of my knife videos know that I've had a lifelong affair with the Buck 110, and I've always been a Buck fan. And oh gosh, let's say in the last 15, maybe 20 years, I feel like the Buck Knife Company maybe has let me down a little bit. Let's face it, those of us who have followed knife technology and knife development over the last few decades know that in many ways time has passed Buck by. Over the years they've sort of tried to keep pace technologically, but either their designs have missed the mark or their execution has missed the mark, and frankly they've released some pretty jacked up blades in the last 20 years or so. A couple come to mind. The Alpha Hunter series, which was a really heavy liner lock knife aimed at the sportsmen, the outdoorsmen, the hunters in the knife market. And it was this really heavy knife. Some had gut hooks and some didn't. Built on kind of a laminated stainless steel frame with wooden scales and big beefy thing, ATS 34 steel blade. And when you get right into it, it had this super flimsy little liner lock. I mean, you could almost grab hold of the blade and close it, mangling the lock. It was just ridiculous. And then they had their Cirrus series of assisted opening knives, and they had this goofy little safety that you had to manipulate to get the knife to open, which totally defeated the purpose of having an assisted opening knife in the first place. And so we Buck fans have waited patiently, kind of like Cub fans, for Buck to come out with a knife that really reestablished their place in the knife world. And for many of us, it looked like the Vantage series of knives would do just that. Boy, they were beautiful to look at. I mean, the lines of this knife are just amazingly beautiful. The G10's beautiful. The milling in the G10 is very attractive. The blade shape, an elegant drop point, hollow ground with a contour that's very thin behind the cutting edge. It's just an amazing slicer, almost Sebenza-like in its shape. Great blade steel, S30V with the Paul Bose heat treat, and even his trademark in the blade. What could not be to like in this knife? Well, there are some things not to like. Now, granted, Buck brought this knife in at a pretty amazing price point 3 or 4 years ago when it came out. The knives, even in the top trim level, the Pro series, could be had for $60 or so, even less at times, brand new. And that's just amazing. For the quality of materials used and the heat treating process used, $60 for a well thought out S30V EDC flipper was pretty amazing. And it is an EDC knife, 3¼ inch blade, 4 ounces. I think they might cheat a little on that. It does feel maybe a little heavier than 4 ounces, but it's okay. So something had to give, right? Yeah, and it did. And when guys started to get these knives in their hands, they noticed a couple things. And this blade got kind of a lot of bad press. The first thing I wanted to look at was the finishing, especially the relationship between the scales and the liners. They're just not well matched. I don't know if the camera's really picking this up, but the edges are just not flush. There was no finish grinding done after the scales were applied to the liners. And, you know, can we forgive them that? Yeah, I guess we can, especially at the price point. A couple other problems, though, that were more serious in a lot of people's minds were persistent issues with blade centering. As you can see, though, my example's perfect. Well, it wasn't that way when I got it. Many of them were skewed away from the lock. So as you're looking at it to the right, part of that is due to some very small Teflon washers that position the blade and that the blade rides on as it rotates. No phosphor bronze. Pretty thick, pretty small diameter Teflon. There's a lot of give in them. Another reason for that is that, well, the construction is just kind of jacked up. You have a very, very small pivot. I'm going to point with my Almar Eagle tonight because my fingers are kind of big. Very, very small diameter pivot. And then what look like body screws here and here are actually not. Those merely hold the scales onto the liners. The construction screws are, well, there are only 3 of them. One you can see going through this standoff about midway down the spine of the knife, and then 2 more that screw the liners into the back spacer here and here. I guess you could call the pivot a construction screw. But given the 4 3/8 inch handle, there's just not a lot of support there. Nothing is pinned. You're pretty much depending on screw location for everything. And there's a lot of slop in this knife, and we'll kind of get to that. One other thing that was executed well is the pocket clip. It is a very deep riding reversible clip, although it does kind of irk me. The most expensive Vantage you can buy with a reversible clip has this beautiful enamel Buck anvil shield buried right underneath the clip if you're left-handed. On the less expensive versions, it's with Zytel handles, the shield is molded in about right here, which would be really nice, but not the case on the Pro. Now let's get to a couple other weaknesses in this knife. I'm going to talk about one with a picture because you really can't see it. I noticed after handling my knife for a week that I developed a chip in the blade right about here. A very small chip or flat spot right in the cutting edge. I thought, that's kind of funny. I didn't see that when it was new. Well, it wasn't there when it was new. As it turned out, there was a problem. In this diagram, I, with my horrible artistic skills, attempt to show what happened. If you notice, this is a picture of the knife closed. backspacer here, blade here. The way the knife comes to you, this is the profile of the backspacer. As you can see, it runs into the knife blade, especially if you close it with authority. There's enough sort of spring in the internal stop pin to allow the blade to slam into the backspacer. One of the mods I made on my knife, and you can do this, it's pretty simple to take apart. Take the backspacer out and use a Dremel tool and some sandpaper and just take some material off the backspacer to give it clearance. There's plenty of material there, not to worry. Easy to do. I want to get into another aspect, very fixable, on the Vantage with another diagram. Sorry guys. You will notice on many of these knives that your blade centering is going to look something like this. And this would be looking down at the spine of the knife closed. And many of them will have lock engagement that looks like this, with the lock very far over to the right. And you'll notice as you take the knife apart and put it back together loosely that if the right side scale is shifted as far this way as possible and the left side scale as far the other way, this is what you'll get. What I did with my knife upon reassembly, and there again, there's quite a bit of slop in the construction of this knife, and it'll allow you to do this. Just sort of loosely tighten the construction screws, and as you do, you can sort of set the knife on a table at an angle, and with a nylon hammer on the corner of the scales, actually, you'd want to sort of drive this scale downward. You're shifting the whole position of the slabs of this knife, and by moving them in these directions, you're going to end up with earlier lockup and blade centering, and I've exaggerated this. You kind of have to play with it. Close the knife, open the knife, see where the lockup falls, see where the centering falls, and when you get it where you want it, tighten it down. That's what I did with mine, and as you can see, I've got great blade centering, pretty good lockup. It's still a little farther to the right than I would like to see it. See if I can get that to focus. But it works. It does all right. For pretty much an EDC gentleman's folder, it's fine. Another thing I noticed, and I'm a lefty, as I said, was that when the knife is closed, and you can't see this on mine because I've fixed it, but the locking liner used to obscure about 30% of the opening hole, which made it difficult if you wanted to use the hole to open the knife with the left hand. You could use the flipper just fine, but the hole was occluded by the liner. And when the knife was open and you took a firm grip, that liner protruded into your meat of your index finger. It was kind of uncomfortable. What I did was took a Sharpie and just drew a line on that liner to follow the contour of the scale, and then I disassembled the knife and with a Dremel tool just recontoured that liner. So I got to see almost the entire hole. It worked great. In fact, you can even sort of dig it and flick it. Those were how I made my Vantage Pro from a pretty poorly executed but beautiful knife into a really, really nice knife that I like. So Campfire, I don't know if any of this helps you. It feels like it's a little rushed, so if you'd like any details about what I did, feel free to write. And really, any of you who are watching this, if you've got a Vantage that you're a little disappointed in and you'd like some further help on how to make this knife that you really want to love into something you do love, just give me a shout in the comments or PM me. That's it for tonight, guys. Grace and peace.